Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where the broadcast finds you. Sorry we were just a little late coming on, but it's great to see some familiar faces and a few new faces and names as well. Let everybody kind of get settled in virtually here. I see sometimes it takes a couple of minutes. I see Doug B is still getting connected. We'll give everybody a chance to come in. This looks great. Yeah, great to see everybody. Well, again, I just want to say good morning or good afternoon. I am once again honored to be here with all of you and want to thank you for joining us for our ongoing virtual native storytelling series. My name is Steve Steiny. I am one of the program managers here for the National American Indian Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center. And I'm also joined by Natasha Peterson, who is part of our communications team, and she'll be assisting us with any online technical issues that may come up or any monitoring of the chat box. So glad to have Natasha here. And of course, we have Richard Zane Smith, our storyteller, is in the house. So we're happy to have him as well. I just want to remind everyone that our center is funded by SAMHSA, and that the content of today's broadcast is created by the presenter and does not necessarily represent the views of SAMHSA, HHS, or the National American Indian Alaska Native ATTC. Additionally, just wanted to again acknowledge that we know that there is currently a political climate right now. Everybody may be on edge at different times, different places, and we know this is stressful for many. But we just want anybody on the call today with differing opinions, please just want to remind everyone to be respectful of each other's opinions and perspectives if they were to come up. I'm very honored today to again introduce Mr. Richard Zane Smith, our storyteller for today's event. Mr. Smith has been facilitating our sessions for the past 2 bi-weekly sessions, and this is his 3rd installment today and the first of 2 winter months stories. Richard is an enrolled member of the Wyandotte Nation of Kansas and is also a certified Indian artisan. He's active in the Wyandotte Language and Culture Revitalization, Longhouse ceremonies, and spent 7 years teaching Wyandotte language and storytelling in the Wyandotte public schools. So today, Mr. Smith's 3rd story is called Pet Snake. And I want going to pull up a piece of his that he shared. He was able to share with me today, and of course I've taken it down. So where did I put that? Hold on one moment here. I'm going to see if I can get this back up. Okay, there we go. Want to share this with everyone. If I can get my screen share to go. There we go. Yes, can you guys see this piece? You guys see that? Richard, can we see that on the screen?
Yes, I sure can.
Great. So I wanted to put that up there as we get ready for today's story. The 3rd story today that Richard will be sharing is called Pet Snake, about a young boy who defies traditional taboos and brings disaster, but a boy who listens to ancestors and saves his village. At the close of our time today, we will be posting a link to our short evaluation in the chat box. If you're not able to complete this prior to the end of the session, we'd really appreciate your feedback, and we'll reach out to you via email to give you another opportunity to complete this short survey. It only takes few minutes, and it allows us to keep funding these no-cost events, and we get to hear from you as far as what you think of these broadcasts. So we really appreciate your feedback and would really appreciate hearing from you via this short survey. Additionally, we are going to be saving the conversation from the chat and sharing that with everyone. So please be aware of this when you are writing comments in the chat box. Of course, we would remove any sensitive information prior to sharing anything that's in the chat box. Currently, you are. And then I wanted to mention too that we are recording this this event today in case a friend or colleague or someone that was not able to join us today could view this at a later date. We will have that available in our HTC YouTube archive for later viewing. You're currently muted, as you know. You can use the unmute feature at the bottom left portion of your computer or laptop, or in the upper right corner of your Zoom screen. If you have any technical problems, please type those in the chat box and we'll try and assist you as soon as we can. Our next storytelling event will be held on Tuesday, December 22nd at 2 p.m. Central. And I believe Richard will be sharing a story called How Bear Clan Became Healers. So we look forward to that as well. So I think without further ado, I will turn the floor over to my friend Richard Zane Smith so we can begin the story hour. Thank you.
Jamais, Steve. Koeo materu sohahio ijatse, Richard Zane Smith. Anyonye aitarai ne quatra sayomendi akoyihti ne Wyandotte, Oklahoma indare. Awayatontra naju utasquekonhe. And I look forward to sharing this time with you and sharing one of our old stories. I greeted you in the Wyandotte language, and I'm Richard Zane Smith, also Sohahio of the Bear Clan, and just happy you all are here. This is isn't one of the important stories that's been passed down to through the generations. It was recorded, and it was actually written down in 1911 by somebody who came out here in Oklahoma to see what kind of things were left, what the Wyandottes still had. And some of the elders were around and actually spoke for the people and had translators. And these stories are written in the language itself, which is really neat because it's really much easier to understand how the language works when you see it that way, instead of just a word list or something. A lot of our language was lost till, well, the last speakers died in the 1960s. So it's been kind of a very difficult process to try to reclaim something that we have, a language has been sleeping. And so we've been trying to wake it up, and it's been a difficult process, but fortunately we do have some good linguists who are, they're like detectives, sleuths, and so we're gathering recordings and written material and all this. So anyway, just a background. Now, a little background to this story too. Because it is wintertime now, we can talk about animals and the animals that spoke. Before then, we aren't to mention, we can refer to those stories, but we can't really share those stories because, well, everybody asks why. But then there's different stories. Some people will tell different things. Some people say, well, those animals, they hear somebody telling a story about them, and they stop gathering nuts, and they start listening in the longhouse, listening, to see what's going on, and they neglect their duties, and so they might starve that winter because they've been listening to their own stories. And but there's all kinds of stories. Some say that if you tell stories, animal stories, in the wrong time of year, the snakes will get in bed with you, you know. And so those are things enough to scare kids too. But this particular story, it's important first to know something about our Wyandotte traditions, and probably a lot of Iroquois traditions as well, the ancient ones. In our beginning of our creation stories, we have a woman who falls from the sky. This is all across all the Iroquois stories talk about this woman. There's a lot of differences, variations in the story, why she fell. And those are all very interesting, and sometimes a little difficult to try to decide which one you're going to tell because you know several versions. But anyway, it's important to know that there were animals down below and in this dark world here. And when she came through an opening in the sky, all of a sudden light was coming from another world up there that had never been seen before, that much light. And there were two swans, they say swans in one story, geese in another, yahon, we call them. They caught the woman on their backs as they saw her falling, and they came to rescue her, and they just kind of, both of them went together and they caught her. So they brought her down to the water. The animals had counsel, and eventually, the world was created. I'm not going to be able to tell this story at this time, but she was given a place on the back of the big turtle, which is Amarureangyaoish, the mossback turtle, the large snapping turtle. And she took some mud from some of the mud that had fallen from the hole from the sky world, and she was able to spread it on the back of that turtle. And she danced, and as she danced, she sang, and she did the shuffle dance around and round on the back of that turtle, and she sang the very first song in this earth, and the woman's shuffle dance song, and she spread that earth, and it became the land. Well, so we have other versions too. There's one version that say it was her who gave birth to twins. Others say, no, that was her mother, and so anyway, twins were born. We'll say that. Twins were born. One was boy of flint, we say, Tawaskare, and the other one was Sista. We call him Sista, the boy of fire. Now, Tawaskare was born in the wrong way. He tore out of her body, and out of the side of her body, and it killed her. Actually, she died. The other boy was Sista, the boy of fire, everything positive. He was everything positive. And the other boy, Tawaskare, he was the boy that everything was negative. But this is important because when missionaries first heard this, they go, good and evil, good and evil, good and evil. So when they're often translating these stories, they say, there's the good twin and there's the evil twin. But it's not like that. In our traditions, we have contrasts, winter, summer, spring, fall, day, night, pain, joy. But we don't have the extremes, of absolute evil or absolute good. So even in these twins that came down, if the good twin, who we call a creator, if his world had been left to be, it would have been really pretty terrible for everybody, because we would have been spoiled. And because he created berries that were like, the size of a cantaloupe, and there were no thorns on anything. Rivers went both ways. You could take your canoe this way down, and then when you wanted to come back, you just get on the other side of the river and zip back. And it's like everything was too easy, and it was Tawaskare, his brother, who changed it all and reduced all those berries to the size they are today, just tiny things, and you got to fight the thorns for them, and the blackberries and the raspberries. And he watered down the trees so that pure maple syrup wouldn't come out of the trees anymore. It was just the watery stuff you had to boil down. So he actually made people stronger. So we can't say good and evil. So this is important for the story. It's important because so often, because we're raised in a culture, that often talks good, evil, black, white, everything is so extreme, and it's as if there's this cosmic battle. It's not quite like that. It's much more like yin and yang, I guess. So anyway, the story I'm going to tell you, this is a story that happened back in the homelands, and our homelands originally were Ontario. So Southern Ontario from the north of Lake Toronto, Lake Ontario, where Toronto is, all the way up to the Georgian Bay was our homelands. And, just thousands of ruins and village sites have been found there, and they're still finding them, of course. And we're involved heavily in trying to make sure that those, when they uncover burials, we get a say about reburying them, put them in a safe place if a road is coming through or a building is being built. So anyway, this story happened up there in those homelands. Now, it's a story. There's a boy who he was growing up in a longhouse village, just like all the other boys, and he enjoyed going out on his own, leaving the palisaded village and wandering down to the stream and just following it. And he became very skilled, like all the kids back in the past. The boys were just expert marksmen with a bow and arrow. They could hit just about anything they aimed at. And he'd be down there practicing his skills. And there was one sunny summer morning. He was walking along the gravel along the side of the creek, and he saw this little snake, just a tiny little thing. And he was looking at it, and he had two responses. First was curiosity, but then he was being checked by his own the teachings that he got as a child, saying, leave him alone. You always leave snakes alone. Don't touch them. Don't play with them. A snake is always a snake. But his curiosity and a little belligerent streak won over on him, and he picked it up, put it in his hand. So he's carrying around this little snake, and it just looks so cute, So he thought, I think I'm going to keep this snake. There's nobody around here. I think I'll keep it. And so he built a little enclosure out of stones and mud, made a little wall for it. And he put that little snake in there. And he said, you just stay there, and I'm going to go get some crickets for you. So he did. He went out and started turning over rocks and took a few worms and crickets, started feeding this little snake. And every time he gave that little snake something to eat, it just gobbled it up, just gobble, gobble, gobble. I mean, that just made him want to do it some more. That was fun to watch. So he kept thinking about, he was nervous because he knew he shouldn't be doing this, but at the same time, he kind of enjoyed it. He enjoyed having that control over an animal, I guess, or enjoyed what was happening, that relationship that was being formed. So after a full day of just feeding it worms and crickets, he finally went back home, went back to the village, up the path, through the palisaded area, through the little place, went into the longhouse where he was growing up. And there was his grandmother, and his grandmother was asking him how his day went and what he did. And, I was playing along the creek, but he would not mention that he'd picked up a little snake. He wouldn't mention it. So he just didn't want her to know. He knew she wouldn't be happy about that. So the next day he woke up, got something to eat out of the pot on the stove, some corn soup. And he went down to the creek to see if the snake was still there. And it was. And it seemed a little bit bigger. But, he thought that's pretty neat. So he started again, just, going around, lifting rocks, turning them over and taking out crickets and bugs and putting them in this little space. And that snake would just eat them up, just gobble them up. Our word for snake is Cugancy. Cugancy. So this little Cugancy was just ferocious in his appetite. Well, after another full day of that, he could not get that snake to just sit there and look at a cricket. I mean, he was just eating all the time. So he went back home. Same thing happened. His grandmother looked at him. What have you been up to? What are you doing down there at the creek? And he's like, oh, just playing, hunting a little bit and throwing stones. And she says, okay. Trust was a big issue back in those days. Nobody lied. It just didn't happen. You in a small, tight village, you don't lie, because one lie, your whole reputation is ruined and everybody will doubt you. So truth telling was an incredibly important thing to do, even if it was uncomfortable truth. So the next day he went down. The snake was definitely bigger. And this time he went out with his bow and he started hunting chipmunks, squirrels. Every time he threw a squirrel in there or a little rabbit, the snake would just gobble it up. And I mean, it was getting fat. And he thought, I'm going to have to rebuild this wall because the snake is going to get out. I don't know why. It didn't dawn on him. I'm just going to stop. But he couldn't stop. This was something he had to do. It's almost like something kicked in where he was no longer in control. The snake was controlling him. He was hunting for him. So he built a wall even higher with rocks and mud. And, excuse me, he started hunting. And I mean, he would be exhausted. By the end of the day, by the time he got to the longhouse and lay down, his mother, his grandmother were a little worried about him. He just looked beat. And he would not explain what was going on. Well, after some time, I mean, this habit or whatever he had was taking over his whole life. It was everything. He went down one day late. He came down and this thing was like peeking out over the top of the rock wall that he built, and it scared him. And it was just had its mouth open and it was hungry. And he's just like, oh, I can't believe this. He spent all day hunting. It's like this area was getting hunted out. He could barely find anything to eat. He had to travel now. He had to go distance. He was able to get a raccoon and got a groundhog, and he was able to feed this thing. But by the time he got back, it was always waiting for him. So that night he went back home and he was looking really depressed, and his folks were asking about him and, are you okay? Should there be other kids coming down to play with you, because you just don't look right. Every day you come back, you're just exhausted. But he kept saying, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Well, the day came when he went down to check on his snake in the morning, and the snake was waiting for him, and it ate him. It actually grabbed him by the head and started to swallow the kid. And then it got out of the stone enclosure. It started coming up toward a nearby village. It wasn't his village, but it was a village that was on the other side of the creek. And it went into the village and it started one after another sneaking through the longhouses and just gobbling up people. This thing was getting massive, massive. In the meantime, on the other side of the creek, where the other boy's village had been, the people had heard about it, and they were fearful because a lot of the men were gone. This is summertime. The men were out hunting, or else they were on the warpath because they've been asked to go raid, to bring in some young captives for the clans, to support the clans because they're getting smaller or whatever reason the clan mothers gave them. So there weren't a lot of men there, and a lot of the canoes were gone. And these villagers lived on a peninsula. And this peninsula, they woke up one morning and the snake had draped its body all the way across this peninsula and was waiting for them. Nobody could sleep that night. Nobody could sleep. And people didn't know what to do. There was a little boy in the village. He actually lived with in the longhouse where, they had a place for orphans, which happened. There were times so they'd find children and they would raise them. And this was he and his sister. I think it was a sister. We don't know for sure. So another little girl, but they lived in the same longhouse, and they talked about what was going to happen that night and what they should do. And they were terrified. Well, in the middle of the night, the boy was visited by an ancestor, and there's not a lot of information about that in the story. It just says all of a sudden he was there, and it was talking to the boy, and he was telling this boy, there is a way to get rid of this snake. There is a way to kill it, but you have to listen carefully. You have to do exactly what I tell you. And if you're brave enough and you do exactly what you're told, you'll have power over that snake. And so he said, what do I do? So the spirit came and told him, he says, first thing you need to do is you have to take one of those bow staves that have been leaning up on the side of the longhouse over there that have been a couple of years old, and make a black locust bow. It has to be black locust wood. So he did. He was working on that. And as he was working on that, the voice was also telling him, you need 2 arrows, and they both have to be made of dogwood, which is what we call red osier down here, or some people call it dogwood. But anyway, the red osier or dogwood. And then it has to be fletched with eagle tail feathers. And it has to have a stone point. Both of the arrows have to have this. They have to be done just right. And every step of the way, he was guided, and he listened carefully. And he did this. He put it all together. He assembled. He tillered out that bow until he could shoot with it. And he made the arrows, and he flaked out those flint points. And with sinew, he wrapped them on. And the fletchings, he was able to strip those feathers and put those on. And he was ready in the morning. He was done. He had it all done. And that morning, he looked out of the longhouse, as a lot of people were doing at that time. And there he could see it, the body of that snake. Well, one of the ancestor spirits had told him, when that snake lifts his head, you'll see 2 circles under its head on its neck, 2 circles. That's where you have to place the arrows. You have to come close enough, and you have to shoot him right in those circles. And the boy was terrified, but he did what he was told. He took his bow with its sinew string and its arrows that he had just made, and he went out to face that Hugenzi, Uwane, the big one. And as he came close, he was shaking. He was shaking. And this huge serpent lifted up its head, just lifted its head way up and started to look at him hungrily. And the boy saw those circles, and he was encouraged by that. He took aim, and he put an arrow right into one of those circles. And that snake was just furious and started thrashing around and coming toward him as close as he could, just thrashing and thrashing and thrashing. But the boy took the other arrow, put it on his string, and held it up. And just at the right time, let that arrow go, and got it right there. And that snake just flopped around on the ground like a chicken without a head until it died. And finally, once it stopped really moving a lot, the people all started coming out, and they were all amazed. It was this little kid that just showed up somewhere, that did this. And, while all the men were gone, all the hunters were gone, the skilled ones were gone, this little kid did it. And they were amazed, and they, first of all, the first thing they did is cut it open, take all the bodies out of the snake, and have a proper burial. And the village was called, the other village was the ones who survived, and they had an ossuary built, and they put all those bodies in that ossuary, and a proper burial was done. Then they burned the snake. made a big fire and decided to burn it. Well, everything looked like it was over. Looked like everything was fine, but it wasn't. It's like people were still really troubled by this experience. Something happened that just changed things. They were just there was darkness in the village that this creature had brought. There was a residue. There was something there. Even though the body of the snake was gone, something was still there. And the people were just confused and really didn't know what to do. So they went to the boy and they said, we don't know what to do, but something has to be done. And the boy, he said, let's go to that place where we burned the snake. So they went out to that spot, and there were just charred wood from where they had laid wood on it and all this, but there was also some little pieces of charred bone. And the boy looked at him and he saw them and he says, I know what to do. He says, if you can find a piece of charred bone from that snake, you can take that charred bone and carve little animals and fetishes out of it. And when you do that, you're taking something that was horrible and you're turning it into something good. And these little fetishes, these little creatures and things you make out of bone, will serve you. Once you've done that, you're taking something that was dark and you're turning it into something light. And the people all did that. They thought, here's somebody with some wisdom, this kid, and he's obviously being spoken to by the ancestors. And so they all did that. They all carved little figures, little animal figures, some of them, and whatever they felt they needed to do. And the darkness went away. And so for many years, the people would come to him as he grew older, and they would ask him for advice, because he was somebody who was a tradition keeper. He was somebody who heard from the ancestors and was a follower of the traditions. And so the story, it kind of contrasts two different types. Again, not good and evil, but somebody who listened to the ancestors and the result of what happens when you don't. So you have these two contrasting figures. And these are how many of our stories work. They're all about seeing how we're intricately woven into the history of our ancestors and the future of our descendants, and that we are that bridge, we are that place, we are that sacred fire where our ancestors meet the generations to come. So a lot of these stories have to do with that. I think the story also represents addictions and what happens with an addiction or a bad habit, that comes into a village, comes into a community, and it's been hushed down, or it's been kept secret, and it's been suppressed, and it just festers. It just keeps there. It has to be dealt with. It has to be purged. It has to be burnt. And then those residues, even the residues of that horrible experience, can be made into something beautiful, something good. And then once that's done, the darkness is removed. So this is the story. It's not a long story, but I think it has a lot of meaning to it in a lot of different ways. And it's one I like to tell. Kids love it, but I think it's a good story for everyone. But if anyone has anything they would like to add or ask, this is the time. Si jamais.
Thank you, Richard. I'll open the floor up now. If anyone has comments or questions or thoughts about that story or something related.
There's one thing I'd like to add too, is that a lot of times because there's been so much disruption among our people, Our roles in our community, our responsibilities in our communities have been erased. So we're trying to get that back. And so it's important, to begin to seek and to find out just what our responsibilities are. What are men's responsibilities in the village today? What are the women's responsibilities in your village? Tribes are all different, so everybody has a different place for that. There's no one Indian way. We all know that. It's ridiculous to think there's an Indian way. But these are things that we lost and that worked for thousands of years. And one of the things I've been dealing with is I feel, and I might have mentioned this the last time, but I feel like men are supposed to be the palisade around the village. They're supposed to be the protectors of a village. That's their job, is to be guarding that which is sacred among, inside, which is everything that we hold valuable, everything feminine, the children, our elders, all that. That's our job. That's not for somebody else or for the law or for someone else. It's really our job. It's our purpose. And I think these are things we have to look at. Sometimes, and even for the best intentions, we have outsiders who come in to our communities and they just want to fix us. They want to make things right. And these outsiders, sometimes they're humble people and are very, very useful to us. And because they're humble, they sit in the back until we ask them for something, for help. Other times you get some in there with big heads and they begin to decide how we ought to be. And we've had this. You don't get it so much today with the younger generation because the younger generation is finally getting, I think, some sense in them. Anthropologists and archaeologists are not quite like they used to be in the old days, where they would want to just come into our village, our communities, and just tell us who we used to be, and tell us how we should be. But these are, to me, these are warning things, warning signs I see too. Maybe I don't call them snakes, but sometimes I do. Snakes to be wary of. I think of snakes in different ways. We did talk about, I mentioned addictions and things like that. They don't have to be people. They can be things that have come into our villages and our communities and have been just sapping our strength. And we can't get rid of it. It's just there. And it's just the cycle, that we're caught in. And it takes people who are listening to those ancestral ways, who are woken up by them and are told, this is how you do this. This is how you deal with this. You have to expose it, expose them, find their weak spot, find the weak spot of that enemy and go for it. And it doesn't mean we're killing off our enemies. I don't mean that in a literal way. I am saying that we do have enemies that are every day. We all deal with them, each of us in our own families and our own communities. But we do need to be mindful of them and try to think about what our responsibilities are. It's a tough job. It's a tough job. And one of those is to give these stories and pass them on, so the children grow up with them. They hear these stories, they know them. But anyway, I'm rambling now, so I'll shut up.
No, Richard, this is
Yeah.
great. Really appreciate that. I just wanted to read a few comments coming in on the chat. Clem comments, he said, I appreciate and love that story, especially as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor that serves Native communities.
Oh, good.
Clem mentions that. Rachel Johnson says, McWitch, and then she says, thank you so much. Great story to use out in the field as I work with families.
Mm-hmm.
More thanks from several other listeners. Alice Palin, she may want to mention this. I'm not familiar with this, but she said it reminds her of a Japanese tradition where the broken bowl is mended and considered more valuable after that effort.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about that. Rebecca says, what ways are you engaging? Oh yeah, here we go. Somebody's. Did I hear someone?
I'm Alice, and I was reminded of kintsugi. And I also want to thank you about the reminder of staying in the back of the room. As an outsider who will be doing expressive arts therapy in an addiction program with the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association. So I would like to consider myself humble, but I'm always open to suggestions. But
Yeah.
anyway, the tradition of kintsugi is that it's like a 400-year-old tradition, and that the broken bowl is mended with care and with it can be with precious uh, uh, adhesive, and that it comes back together more beautiful because it has gone through that growth and transformation. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is a incredible, good way to describe that. I mean, in a way, it's what a river is. It's what a creek is. They're all cuts in the earth. And yet they become lifeways. And so it's a beautiful tradition. And again, a lot of those Eastern traditions, they also have that idea that it's not about this epic battle of good and evil, but it's about these balance, keeping things in balance. It's not that, you don't just keep telling yourself you're junk, you're trash. You're not, nobody's trash, nobody's junk. It's just, there's some brokenness, and brokenness needs to be mended. So, but I think that's something we can all learn from. And some of the, I know some traditionalists have had a little hard time with some of the, the AA stuff, because it's a little too Christian for some people. I'm not saying that, it's wrong, but it's, there is a shadow to it, that doesn't always fit us, fit our people and our traditions. If those Christian traditions point us back to our ancestral roots and our ancestral stories, that's fine. I think that's the way it should be. But we just have to weigh things carefully. Some things just don't mix, oil and water, unless you're always shaking it all the time.
Good. Richard, Rebecca says, she asks, what ways are you engaging your tribal youth in learning their language and culture? That's a big question.
Yeah, it is a good question. The main thing we're doing now, well, except for the COVID thing, we've been holding social dances almost once a month. And these social dances, we bring the kids in, we get them on the bench with us singing, we get them out there dancing. So it's just and we have food, so we bring them in, we do stomp dance, social dances, eat together. So the kids have a really good time. And then in winter months, we try to do a little bit of storytelling. And sometimes it's a little chaotic and it's a little hard to settle all these kids down. So we have tried some more formal, like in school stuff, but we're still working on that in a lot of ways here. We're still struggling the best way to do that. People are so busy these days. It's like, it's hard to have an after school program because kids are all involved in sports. They go running off to this and running off to that. So it is going to take some serious sitting down together. Again, we do this once in a while, like, okay, what do we need to do? So we haven't got it nailed down yet. We're still working on that because one of the things for us, we don't have any ceremonies really from, say, September all through until our maple ceremonies. That's a long time for kids to be away from our culture. We try to get our kids to attend the ceremonies, of course, and participate in them, but it is tough. It is tough. There's a lot of competition out there. And then with the internet, makes it even harder. So it's a difficult, it's really difficult. It's going to take all of us, I think, trying to find out what works, what works in your community. And it's difficult.
A couple other comments. Abigail says, I like how a key part of this hinged on whether or not the boy would talk to his family, especially since what he was doing was considered taboo.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's important. I think it's important to, if you see something in your child you just think there's a shadow there, that somehow, they need to feel that they can talk about it, and it's tough though. I mean, I've had kids, our kids, we had a boy and a gal, and they go through those stages, they just don't want to really talk to you, and they want to figure things out themselves. But the thing that I'm happy with is that they both say, man, I had the best childhood. And that, just makes me feel great too. For me and my wife, to think they just have wonderful memories in their childhood. Yeah.
Callie says, she said, I needed this story today. Thank you so much for sharing.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
And Veronica says, thank you so much for the story today. I appreciated how you started by saying how strong a value that honesty was in our Native traditions. She adds, I wonder if there are stories about the struggle between honesty and dishonesty in the survival of Native villages.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the first one that came to mind is kind of interesting because it's the one the missionaries called the good twin, the positive twin, which I would say, boy of fire, Sesta. He fools his brother by lying to him, basically finding his weakness, and defeats him. So we have examples of lying that seem to work out good, and it's like one of those situations where it's like, aha, he got him. We have that kind of lying, but I think that's a little different than the just being a deceiver. Being somebody who's a deceiver, and I think. I think there's a lot of gotcha kind of stuff that goes on with Native traditions. We have all kinds of teases, and my gosh, I mean, if you're too sensitive, man, you're going to die because we tease like crazy. And some of it is, just stretching the truth. And if somebody's getting a little big headed, we'll fix them, we'll fix them. So, but I think it is important, that we, the lying, is catching, that's one thing with our kids that I would give them a swat on the butt for, is for lying. Nothing else they did, but yeah. We made a big deal out of it. We told them, we said, this is really, really important, that you tell the truth. And it didn't even have to be something outrageous. It could be just something silly, but that was always the best time to get them, and to point it out to them and say, if you're lying about this, we'll never know if you're telling the truth about something that's really important. So this is, that's why we would kind of catch it in the bud, nip it in the bud. But it is so important. It's so important for all of us, is to really be honest and be truthful. I mean, you can't always tell everything you feel about somebody, but you can be honest. So I think the world will be a better place.
I have another comment here, Richard, from Bobby. Says HABU has a collection of transcribed stories from the Pacific Northwest area. Lots of stories and good references for further research. I don't know if there's a link to those, Bobby, or if that's something you could share with the group or not.
That's great. Yeah. And almost all of our communities, we have these amazing stories, and this is this is a crazy format, using it this way, but it works, and it's kind of who we are today. And we've always adjusted to the times. So, it works and it gets out there, the stories get out there in the language. Our ancestors said, no ne satariware neswati shwagya nesatidrawa ndai hara askanon yenik. And what they were saying is when we gather together, when we eat together, when we feast, when we dance together, hatidrawa, only then, only then will the peace return. It's really important for us, to come together for dances. It's important for us to come together to eat, share with one another, and not just funerals, get together. This time, with the COVID, this is the best we can do, the Zoom thing. But it's all right, it's something, and it's the message is getting out there. But it's so important. I think those little insights are really important too, that we pay attention to that. But pass those stories, and look at other traditional stories too from other cultures, and sometimes they apply, sometimes they're a little different, but we can learn from all of them.
Richard, we got some more comments, just some thanks from Doug, and some more thanks from Cheryl. Gabriella is saying the beauty in these stories is how it brings your focus to yourself and your situation. You take in each word from the storyteller for its full value and its application to your very own situation. I love how, without ever directly having to state the purpose of the story, you feel the purpose. Thank you for this experience.
Yeah. It was. Mm-hmm.
Yes, more thanks coming in. This has been a really, really great experience for a lot of folks here. So do we have a few minutes left. Any other closing thoughts or comments? I want to thank everyone for joining us. And if you get a minute, please complete that survey. It's just a brief survey that'll allow us to keep our folks and keep us continuing to provide events like this. So just want to again thank everyone for joining today. We'll broadcast again December 22nd, and we'll hear about the Bear Clan, how they became healers. Just some more thanks coming in. Richard, thank you. And we can conclude today's broadcast. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all too for listening in, and appreciate it. I really do. Si jamais.
We have somebody asking if they can get previous recordings. And yes, I think we've managed to record just about every one of the storytelling hours, Richard's included. So yes, we have those on our ITTC secure YouTube site. I can make that available to you, Ms. Sandoval, if you would like to email me or email the center, and we can send you that link. In fact, I have that link handy here. I could post that.
Yeah, I'm trying to post it right now, Steve.
Oh, great! Thank you, Natasha. I have too many. I have too many screens open here. I want to. Okay. Well, I think we'll conclude our broadcast today. Oh yeah, there's the link for the. If anyone's interested, they can check that out. It's our ATTC YouTube site. It's got all of our recorded events there, going back quite a ways. So most of the events we do are recorded, other than a few that we don't record just to protect privacy. So anyway, thank you very much, Richard. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks. And until then, everyone stay safe and stay healthy and stay connected.
Yes. Mhm. Oh.
I hope.
Hmm.